Do I have it? Oh. Do I have it in landscape? Do I have everything in landscape here, guys? I can't tell. I actually have to connect this. Let's see. Get it to sit here for the moment. Oh, shoot. Is that gonna... Wait a minute. That may work perfect. Let me just adjust this. Check that out. How does that work? Is that pretty good, guys? Somebody comment. Somebody say something. Can somebody say something? Nice. Okay. Check that out. Oh, that's awesome. Ah! I screwed it up. Sorry. Hang on. I'm trying to get this so you guys can see me in this really awkward spot. All right. Check that out. Okay. Live demo of the tools. It's out. I am sideways? Is this sideways? Is it better to stream in portrait? Yeah, I know, but buffering is annoying. Sorry. Is it better to stream in portrait? Would you guys rather that? For now? Until I get it figured out? Got a rubber band here. Is that okay? Okay. Okay. I can't. We actually have 5 guys on the stream. That's crazy. That's great. On a Saturday morning. How's everybody doing? Yeah, nobody. No, we don't want you lay on your side. That's no good. Okay. I hope the stream keeps going. So where do we start? Where do we start? Well, let's first off. Don't you guys hate like all those cooking shows where they show you how to cook by giving you like these little bowls of chopped onions and salt and all that stuff, and then they're like, "Hey, watch this. We could just go boom, 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 and it's all together." Isn't that annoying? Like, you have no idea how long it actually took to prepare that. So what I've got here is just as annoying, because yes, I have prepared this. I spent probably an hour, hour and a half, kind of getting all this stuff here to this point. What we have are brand new Nachi bearings here in the saw. I've got basically everything's kind of cleaned down, and I've used brake cleaner on these surfaces, so the surfaces are basically ready to go. Got my gasket, and so I guess we're basically ready to install this and do all that. So, order. Well, here's something interesting. Let's not blue Loctite the 2 anterior bolts yet, and there is a reason for that, but let's put some Loctighten the rest of the ones here. And just so everybody knows, I cannot see the comments right now because the phone is facing the wrong way, so I can't see what everybody's saying. So I will try to check the comments periodically. Okay, so that's Loctited. Everything's pretty clean. Get out our 1184 and start working. Again, I just want to get rid of the shine here. This is why nobody does like chainsaw live streams, because it's doggone boring. You're gonna watch me put goop on a couple of surfaces? I mean, really, who wants to see that? I don't know, maybe some of you guys do. Some of you guys are like, hey, this is sweet. All right, so I'm doing it. Again, thanks to Brian and Ryan for bringing the saw. Gave me something to do today. Not that I don't have other stuff to do, I do. But, you know, when something's in front of you, you just kind of got to make sure that it's, you know, I got all kinds of stuff here in the basement. I'd love to get rid of it. I'm going to give a shout out to my good buddy Seth, who needs to help me get some of these saws out my basement. Seth, you know who you are. Got 2 saws here I got to finish. Waiting on you, buddy. So you don't have to use the goop. I do, because I want to make sure that if there's any imperfections in the surface here at all, that the goop helps take up that more than the gasket could. And when I've split these with after using this in the gasket, and it's really interesting because the gasket itself actually splits in 2. Like the goop holds so well to the gasket actually just gets split in half, which I find fascinating. So really a testament to how well 1184 does actually work. I didn't want it inside here too much. Okay. Positioning pins. Now, unlike the, you know what, I need a little bit more goop here. Unlike the 372, both of these positioning pins do have bolts that go through them. Along the top here, this is a really long span with no bolt. And also up here is a spot that tends to not want to seal quite right, so you want to make sure those are really good. Okay, that'll be fine. So this tacks up pretty quick. Anyway, so yeah, the 372, one of the bolt, I think it's down here, does not have, or the positioning pin does not have a bolt go through it. Both of these do. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now I like to lay the gasket right down here. It's going to kind of tack a little bit, so we can actually put this aside for the moment. I'll come around and look and see if there's any comments. Somebody commented yesterday on the difference between the 394 and the 395, so let's see here. Wow, holy cow. Portrait, yes. Okay. Sorry about the portrait. We're gonna work on that eventually. Hate cooking shows in general and cooking on YouTube. Yeah, okay. Change to 480p works best. Okay. I've noticed using 1184 more than I used to. Yeah, Walt really turned me on to this stuff, and I'm really liking it. I was using a lot more of the Loctite 518, but it doesn't stick well to plastic, and I'm just not confident in its sticking to gaskets. And if you use the 1184 just fine, then it's fine. So, Adirondacks for me. So the rebuild on the 350. Yeah, you're welcome. I really like my 350s. Pretty much my I could probably live with a 394 and a 350 and be totally good. I like my 372s okay, but give me a 350 and a 394 and I could probably do just fine. Anyway, let's get the crank here. You know what? Let's use some grease. Put some grease on the crank here, just a little bit, not much. Both sides is good. So here's where the rubber meets the road. Got to get this crank into here. So the crank I've cleaned pretty good, not too worried about it at this point. So take the crank, stick it in. Obviously it does not press in. If it does, you probably have to, on a brand new bearing, if the crank just slides right in, I would heave-ho that crank personally, because you got a spinner and you don't want that. Okay, so an M12, this is M12 by 1.25. Get the rod, sloppy fit, does not need to be tight. The sleeve goes down, and notice you have room. Always check and make sure there's room here on the sleeve, and there is. So now your bolt can go right in here. That's your handle. Down and then back off a couple of turns. Now your handle's good. And you can use a washer if you want to. You can use a bunch of washers if you want to, but that's up to you. And of course you can use a socket, a deep socket, whatever kind of you need and whatever works for you. Again, you could probably use an impact on this, but you're working with threads and things, and probably best to just do it this way. So you just crank this on down until it stops. That's it, and I'm not even using a lot of leverage. You don't need a lot of leverage. You go until the whole thing stops. So now, reverse it. That's all you need to do there. The crank is now seated home in the bearing. And the steels are at least a little bit different sometimes, because if you need to center a crank and whatnot, you can just make stops and shims. But on the Huskies, you don't. I just haven't found that you really need to do that. So you move all the pieces. For right now, I'm going to put some of these aside. So now we've got that ready to go. And now we can take our other half here And stick it on. Now, before you do this, make sure it's a good time to, pop these out if you need to. A good time to make sure that vent's okay. I mean, the vent looks fine to me, the vent tube there. So we're pretty good there. Flip that around. These 394s are nice because they sit nice. Some of the other saws don't, of course. Now, this is one of the areas where I know one guy, I won't mention his name, it might have been a couple of guys at this point, they use the right rod and the wrong sleeve here. So this is M10 by 1. This is a different rod. This is a 5/8 instead of 3/4. Oh, and I forgot, I've got 5/16. Yeah. We remachine these to 5/16 because 3/8 is a little bit too big for 5/8. It does work, but 3/8 is a little too big for 5/8 rod. So yeah, that'll work there. Notice there's no hurry. Okay, but back to what I was saying. So 5/8 rod, 3/4 inch inner diameter sleeve. This is what you want to use because this is a 6203 bearing. If you use the smaller sleeve, you're going to bend something. Now, if you want to take up the slop, if you're worried about that, 10 turns of electrical tape just right there, and then it'll take up all the slop. But you don't really need to, as you'll see. This goes just fine. So let's get the handle here. Now the handle, because this is 5/16 instead of 3/8, the handle's a little bit smaller, so a little less leverage, but that's okay, because you don't need lots of leverage. Start turning. Now, your left hand is free to maintain the connecting rod in whatever position you want. You can make sure the positioning pins are in the right spot. Crucial that the positioning pins are in the right spot. Also made the mistake before of putting this whole thing together and why it wasn't quite going. Well, if you look underneath sometimes, let's say the oil tube was in there, it might be sticking out the bottom and in between it bad. So just be careful that there's nothing accidentally in between your case halves. You're like, why is it not fully tightening up? It's weird. Yeah, that's why. So, that's it. You don't need much. Reverse it. And, one of the downsides of these tools is they don't wear. They don't wear out. It means I can't sell too many of them. Sucks for me. Benefit for everybody else. These damn things just don't wear out. Uh-oh. Potential kiddos. So now we can put our bolts in. Pause for a minute. Let me tell the kiddos what's going on. Baby, I'm doing live video downstairs. Can you keep it quiet? Places. Yes. Okay, I'm back. All right. Time to get the bolts in the bolt holes. Now, we already have... Where did... We already put the Loctite in there, so we don't really need to worry about Loctite, which is good. Just pause. All right, guys, the kid's being crazy. Okay. So, actually, let's check the comments. See if there's any questions. Yes, I'm babysitting along with rebuilding. Are my arms still sore from the get-together? Yeah. I think, well, it wasn't all just from the get-together. The, I was, you know what, hang on. Let's fix this. There we go. So yeah, my arms are not just sore from the get-together, but I was doing some arm wrestling, and I think I ended up with basically tennis elbow. So every time I aggravate it, well, yeah. Anyway, it gets aggravated. Okay. So let's get some bolts in. Now most of these are the same except for that one and that one. So 1, 2. Make sure the heads are pretty clean. That's usually a good idea. So yeah, so it wasn't the get-together's fault that my arms were sore necessarily, but I've been watching more and more arm wrestling online, and as you can see, I'm not that big of a guy, so I get hurt, you know. Anyway, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there'll be 1, 2 in the front, and actually this lower one, I do need to Loctite, because that's going to go in and I won't be able to access that, and you'll see why, because there's a spring that goes there. Okay, here we go. And no, I'm not trying to impact it in. That's not the idea. Just want to get them in, you know. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. The 7th one we will get to. Let's put this spring on. That's good to go. See, what happens is in here, the muffler sits, right? But the dog is kind of in the way of the muffler. So, do you put the dog on later? Probably. What I'm going to do, let's do this. I need a placeholder. I'm going to put in the upper dog bolt, which is also the case bolt. I'm going to put that in temporarily. I've got a washer on it to take up at least some of the slack. There. So now the case is good. Let's do some seals before debris gets into the bearings. Now this is definitely where I like to use the red Loctite. Now I gotta go find my seals. Where are they? Everything's here, just a matter of finding it. Gonna need that. For this, I don't really mind the highway seals. I think they're totally fine in this application. I don't necessarily think you need OEM for this. Okay, so Coke can trick. Take a piece of Coke can with rounded ends. Put the seal on there. Now you've got something kind of to hold on to. A piece of 35mm film works. Any other piece of stiff plastic will probably work. The aluminum is not strong enough. The aluminum is not strong enough to actually cut the seal. It's too weak. The rubber is too tough. So now I can take this and put it over the lip. This piece of copper pipe is rapidly becoming my seal installer. It was one of my original sleeves, but I like to make this flush. On the PTO side, I make it flush. And that's pretty close. If you want to take a good enough size deep socket, you can actually get it really good. So let's take the Coke can out, because now the seal is over the lip, which is the whole point of the Coke can. Let's see if we can find a deep socket here that's appropriate. Too small. One side's up. Yeah, that'll work. If you have a lathe and you're thinking ahead, you can actually make a piece that'll fit perfectly on that and just go kaboom and it's done. And if you're not thinking ahead, you'll end up like me. I don't have a lathe here, it's at my parents', so I don't always think of adapters and whatnot that I could make. Anyway, so that's the seal installation for the PTO side. Nice and even and flush all the way around. It's one of the things I like about the 394. That's a really simple installation, and that's going to last a long time. Basically the same thing with the other side here, with the exception of you really need to use a micrometer. So, not a vernier caliper. So if you measure to the inner race of the bearing, yeah, a little less than 10 millimeters. So 9.8 millimeters. And this is about 5 millimeters thick. So I want to make sure that the depth of the edge here is about 4.5 millimeters and not any deeper, because I might run the risk of running into the inner race of the bearing. And if the inner race rubs against this surface, it's not so good. Not the best. Again, with the Coke can here, on this side, theoretically you don't need it, but I've tried it without, and I've puckered a seal. I really don't like puckering seals, because then I'm guaranteed to need to do a vac test later. Now, if you want to do a vac test on every build, I mean, nothing wrong with that, but I don't typically do that. I can, but I don't do it necessarily on every build. My Loctite 518 away. In case anybody was, that was Loctite 518 that goes on the seal. And we're going to take and hammer this seal in. Got to make sure it goes in evenly. Yep. Let's go a little deeper. Now we can pull the Coke can out because I'm over the initial lip anyway. Now, kind of the trick to this side, and I don't know why there's so little of a margin of error, but there's actually a lip on the crank, and this seal will tend to just sit on top of the lip instead of actually sitting on the side of the crank. So this has got to be driven deep enough, and you really need to get a good close-up of this to see it and to understand what's going on. But if you don't drive it deep enough, then it doesn't quite sit as it should. So 3.8 millimeters, so I have a little bit more to go. That looks good, at least on this side visually. 4.22. 4.4. 3.8. 4.58. Okay, so not too much more here. 3.82. So really a little lopsided. 4.33. 4.6. 4.57. 4.23. Almost right about. That should about do it. 4.55. There we go. So maybe 1/10 of a millimeter from one side to another, and it's just over this lip here. So that should really do. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Again, if you get sick and tired of measuring, you just make that piece that fits perfectly here on the lathe, get it started, and then kaboom, and then you're done. So, anyway, look at that, nice and smooth. Very nice. So, I still remember one of the guys, it was Ben on YouTube, no, on eBay, Ben from eBay, he said get the tank on early in the build. So I've liked doing that. I think I could put the oiler on first, though. I mean, do you guys want me to keep going here? What do you want me to do? Can you give me a little feedback on that? Should I keep going? Should I? Do you want to see more of the build? Do you want to see me set squish and all that stuff, or what do you want to see? Keep going? Okay. How many guys we got? 9 guys. That's pretty good. I'm happy. Should a GTG in Georgia? You've got to have a GTG in Georgia. Yeah. So, did you guys like? You guys like the video on the get together over at Lee's? That was nuts, huh? So, that was I think my second time going there, and I mean, that was all kinds of fun. Physically, I was tired. I literally didn't sleep the night before, I do get nervous for those things, so I couldn't sleep. So I ended up going over there at like some completely insane hour. Um, so here's a neat trick, and I've shown this before, but uh, you got the pawl and you got your adjuster, and the aftermarket ones are okay. This is not a bad part to buy aftermarket. You do not necessarily need to get OEM. But what is cool about these is you get one of these E-clip assortment packs. This one I got at Pep Boys. Get an E-clip assortment pack, and then you find an E-clip that clicks on to this one spot here. Get an E-clip, it clicks onto this one spot. If it goes. You gotta make sure, you're just gonna test it. This may be too small one. Might be too small. Hang on. Wrong one. No, I think that's the right one. .3/16 E-clip. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, that's the right one. Okay, this is a 3/16 E-clip. So here's what you do. Check this out. You got to make sure the clip actually fits in the slot here. There's supposed to be a rubber piece. I hate them because they just disintegrate. So you get your adjuster, stick it in there. Those darn rubber pieces disintegrate. Okay, now we can stick the E-clip in. That's never coming out. It's never going to do its own thing either, unless you pull it out. You know, watch this. Just undo it. Oh, maybe I have it in the right spot. Click. If it's not quite tight enough for you, guess what? Trim these things down a little bit. Totally fine. This is going to go in. Put this in right here. Click. So that'll never erode. And most of the, I mean, you're not using this enough to cause a whole lot of damage in here, so nice. Okay. How about, let's do the oil dip tube. Now, I've been doing the oil dip tubes. I get a little bit of brake cleaner on here. Make sure the surface itself is clean, that the rubber is going to go up against. Q-tip. Then what you do is you fire some brake cleaner down your rubber hose. Now, obviously, these rubber hoses are rubber, and they don't necessarily last forever. So, if you need to, you can replace them. Almost clean. That's clean and degreased. Go back to my 1184. So in case the rubber has taken a set over the years, and is not necessarily going to seal quite as well up against the oiler itself, then this is what kind of gives you a little bit of cheap insurance. So I put a little bit around the oiler hole here, and then we can just stick this down. But what I find is it actually helps to tilt the saw when you do this, because you want gravity to work in your favor. Okay. So if you try to get this down, it might hit something. So what you do is you tilt it down, straight through. Then gravity is going to help because it's going to pull that brass piece down a bit, and then squish that down. Now you're squished. Check that out. Okay. How are you doing? It's like waiting for the birth of a baby, yeah. Who gets nervous? Don't make that a pain when you... No, it doesn't make it a pain when you remove it at all. No. As it turns out, it's actually not bad at all to remove this stuff. So don't even worry about it. Let's get the oiler. And you'll forgive me for 2 seconds. I gotta go clean the oiler. I'll be back. I'm just gonna go over to the sink and give this a quick wash. I'll be right back though. I think that was David that asked the question, does it make it a pain to remove? No. Turns out it comes right out. You know, goop only holds so much, and it does actually stick to itself pretty good, I think. So I don't really worry about trying to remove it. Plus, usually, you know, these type of things, this might be the only rebuild this chainsaw ever sees before it ends up in the junk. So put it together best you can, and that's that. One thing I've noticed about the oilers is that the indexing pin that is inside here is just a pin on a spring, and this seems to be working fine. Clicks in, beautiful. So I'm going to leave that just like that. One other thing I do like to do is I'll take my WD-40 and I'll go in here and And I'll oil up the oiler. Make sure it's free spinning. Then what you do is you go by hand and make sure the oil comes out there, which it is. You can see that. So the oil pump is actually working. I don't want to install an oil pump that isn't working. So then what I do is I hit this with brake cleaner. Make sure that's degreased. Around those particular spots. Then I'll go back to my 1184. Again, don't need tons of it, just a light coat. In case anybody's wondering, no, it doesn't clog this up. Weird, huh? Put the X-ring on there. All those are tight. You know, we also need a little bit of Loctite on the oiler bolts. A lot of goops and things. I mean, it's really lots of liquids and goops and all kinds of different stuff. You got to remember, it's all got to be in the right order. Okay, so we're gooped up on the 1184 here. We've got our Loctite in the bolt holes to hold the oiler down. Now I can just get the oiler seated in here. There we go. Now we need our oiler bolts here. Which I believe are the same as the ignition coil bolts. 1, 2, 3. Don't really want to snug them yet. $3mm. 1, 2, 3. And your oil Yeah, I got to tiptoe through the chainsaw boxes. There's plenty around here. Yeah, in this case, the bolts aren't going to back out and hit the flywheel. They might hit. Well, let's see. What would they really hit? This might back out and hit the chain, but I just don't see these back out. And these bolts are on this side of the crankcase as opposed to the flywheel side. 372 has them on the flywheel side. Anything else before I keep going here? Am I doing good? We're down to 6 viewers. Come on, guys. It's okay. If there was 1 viewer, I'd still do it. 7. Check that out. Who just showed up? Post a comment. Who just showed up? All right, so let's work with the cylinder head next. Actually, the piston and cylinder. Oh no, sorry. My bad. Let's do the tank next. These tanks are pretty nice in the sense you just put the tank here and basically slap this right on. The 372s are much more of a pain in the neck that way, though. I mean, this has got 2 things here to stick up and through our base. Probably. Okay. Somebody asked yesterday the difference between 394s and 395s. So the first thing to address the difference is the different crank. It's the same stroke, this basically the same everything, except it uses the crank uses a different flywheel. So it uses an M8 nut and a flywheel with an integral key, not a Woodruff key. So if you're going to, you can swap out in a 394, you can use the 395 flywheel and crank, but it's a combination that you've got to use. Either will interchange. But you just got to use the flywheel and crank that are appropriate for each other. So that's one particular issue. The next is this base, and it's the reason is that the throttle cable is slightly different. These throttle cables have this little plastic thing on them, and it goes up and through a hole on your base here, the carb base, and it does not, I mean, you can retrofit a 394 carb base to work with a 395, but it's much harder to go the other direction. The 395s use a, it's more like a 372 where that there's a flange that has an arm sticking out that actually grabs the throttle cable and uses it as a stop. So that's at least a little bit different there. So like I said before, make sure that you do not throw out these 394 carb bases. You cannot get them anymore. On the upside, we do have this nifty thing called 3D printing these days, and it's, you know, it would be awesome to get some of this stuff potentially 3D printed. It always drives me nuts that Husky makes these holes here for the fuel line just a little bit too short. And then you have to, this is actually a fairly new fuel line. I'm going to pull a little bit extra out, just a touch, just to get a little bit. And then I'm going to create a tip to this, just a little bit of an angle. And then this will go up and through a little bit easier. Then I can grab it. Now, if you're doing a new build, like a brand new build, you're going to have the fuel line be a little bit longer than that, and then you can cut it off later. Okay. Couple of bolts for the back that go in the AV mounts. 1, 2. Hopefully you guys are starting to get the feel like this saw is really not that big of a deal to do. Because it's not. It's just not. It's really quite straightforward. As long as you don't lose your bolts. Okay, let's do... These are actually both for up front there. Actually, I guess we can put this positioning bolt in. Goes over here. Because we're putting the tank on, might as well. I don't know why these two front bolts here seem to have noticed disappear. Flange bolts. Let's find them. Always got to have a huge stinking assortment of bolts just in case something disappears. And since I'm running between chainsaw boxes, bolts are everywhere. So, an opinion here, if you are going to be modifying these significantly, if you're altering squish and all that stuff, one thing that, if you're going to be setting the cylinder head down, this spot here on the carb base, you need to wallow out a little bit so that the cylinder can actually sit a little bit further down. And you do have to be careful. These posts here you can shave down just a teeny bit also, again, because the whole thing is rigid, and if you set the cylinder head down a little further, you got to make space for it. My opinion. So that's on there. How about underneath here? Now this unit had both the AV mounts, the rubber mounts, they're already there, so that's great, but that's definitely one thing to look out for on these. So you get both the rubber AV mounts that are already there, which is awesome. But it's missing two limit screws here, so let me see if I can find those. If anybody wants to donate to the cause here, these darn limit screws, I always seem to be low on because they're always getting lost. I'd love to have like 100 of these, but I think they're like $2 a shot. If somebody can find them for me for like 50 cents a piece, that would be great. Do you really need these? No. I like the sense of completeness that comes with these. And really, you can have 4, but I don't think there's really any point of having this one in here. Seems to me like I need to put a tap through there. And how cuckoo am I? I've got an M5 tap on tap. There we go. Don't worry, guys. We're going to get to the cylinder head in a minute because it's interesting. After we get beyond the cylinder head, everything else is boring, but cylinders, at least, it's going to be somewhat interesting here. I wonder if this hole was never actually populated. I don't think this screw's ever been in here. Good. Don't move. Okay. Cylinder. This all happened to still be attached, so I kind of left it that way. So I cleaned up the cylinder head considerably here. I did actually go in there and did effectively the Mastermind method with some sandpaper. You gotta go easy, you gotta go slow, make sure it's pretty smooth after you're done, and it is. Meteor piston. You know, these are really nice. It's nice. Nice piston. So, let's put in a wrist pin bearing. Those do get lubed before they go in. Now I'm not aiming to put the cylinder head down right this second. What I need to get, very simply, is a squish number. So if because I really would like to do a base gasket delete on this, you know, for customer saws, don't really need to do all the crazy porting and whatnot. Base gasket delete is just fine on these. Nice pop. A little extra oomph. Razor blade on the gasket here. As I mentioned before, Brad Snelling's idea. All right. So now we do get the head. Stick the head on here. No circlips. Not, you know, just want to get the head on. This is what? 3/16. This is a 3/16. These bolts are 1/4 just to screw everybody up. So I get 2 bolts, stick them in. Good time to check the head bolts and make sure they're not stripped out or nothing. little bit of grease on the end of the Allen, and it actually holds the bolt vertically very well. Where's my 3/16 driver? Crud. It's out in the shed somewhere. Great. Alright, so I guess I'll use this. Reasonable tight. Get the flywheel. Make sure it's not a head slapper. I'm going to come over and just check everything. Check the comments. How we doing? The answer is yes, it will change timing if you do a gasket delete, but it's not necessarily bad. And it's not going to change timing that much. You're only talking about a difference of 20 thousandths. So yes, it will change timing, but whatever the difference is at 20 thousandths, you're dropping the exhaust. So your exhaust might go from 103 to like 102. Your transfer ports might go from 122 to 121. And the intake gets a little lower, so you get a little bit more you get a little more duration on your intake. So you go from a 75 intake to a 76. So, and none of that's really bad. It does change timing. It's a very, very small amount. So we don't have a head slapper. That's good. Too much stuff on here I don't need. Hang on. See, I have a bad habit of not putting stuff away. We're going to need this in a minute. That. And yeah. Okay. Squish. Right. Where'd my little solder go? That's not good. Ugh. I didn't. Okay. Usually I use my little solder. This is bigger solder. This is like 60 thousandths. Gonna stick this in there. Or the wrist pin. So 25, 30, 33. Even with a gasket delete, we're at 32, 33 thousandths. Squish. So absolutely not worried about doing a gasket delete. Don't need to worry about that at all. Just do need to make sure the flywheel doesn't run into your head here, which it does not. If you're really lowering the cylinder head, it might. So just something to keep in mind there. Okay. So let's get these bolts off. Sorry about the sound, guys. I'm in the far part of the basement compared to the Wi-Fi. So I need to move the Wi-Fi, essentially. That way we have better reception here. already reasonably confident this is clean. So I just need to make sure the base here is degreased. A little brake cleaner on the base. Now because we do have double rings here, and this is kind of a pain to get the rings into, I think I'm going to do the technique where you actually put the piston in the cylinder before you before anything else. So let me do that. This I don't need for the moment. We'll clean up here, guys. Hang on. Probably need this. 2 head bolts. I may need another one. Okay, wrist pin comes out for the moment. So one of the circlips, let's see. You know, I do like using OEM circlips, but on a Meteor, you've got circlips that came with it, and it's like, do I really want to use the OEMs or do I want to use these? I think I'll use these, the ones that came with the piston. I think there's a good case for doing that. Arrow points to the exhaust. I trust everybody that's watching knows that already. Probably otherwise you wouldn't be watching my channel, but whatever. Click. So you get your first circlip in. Put our rings on. Actually, while I'm doing, before I do that, let's get this all kind of gooped up first. Brake cleaner here. So the cylinder head surface is good. That surface is good. Loctite. $11.84. Most crucial spot on here is probably right here at the intake side, because it's real thin. But and right here on the passenger side, the flywheel side here. I'm going to put some on the cylinder here too. Now, what I want to do is I want to get this tacked up pretty good before I go to seat it. Now, while that's tacking, do the rings. At 394, back to the differences between 394 and 395. 394 has different positioning pins. They're way off to the side. Now, I don't know why they did that. That doesn't make any semblance of sense to me. Why would you put positioning pins way off to the side? I would think you'd want them pretty much straight in line with the intake, but if they're too much to the side, then you end up hooking a ring in the intake if you're doing a lot of port work. So nice to have a little bit of a different spot here. All right, a little bit of oil, just a WD-40. Don't like putting lots of oil on these things. Somebody was mentioning this. I don't want to interfere with the 1184, you know? Remember, the positioning pins go towards the intake side. Somebody in here is going to comment, gee, you need a set of ring compressors. Yeah. In. All right, here's where you start to get a little nervous because you're not sure if you got everything right. 1184 is good on the cylinder head. 1184 is good all the way around there. Tricky thing now, getting this circlip in there. Forget about the circlip. Let's just get the piston pin in. There we go. Wrist pins in. I will apologize in advance. Showing this would be quite tricky. Click. Perfect. Beauty. All right, let's see how we're doing here. Check on the comments. Battery power low. So I may lose the stream here, guys. Yeah, you don't have to worry about the 1184 hardening up. It doesn't really hard. It tacks, but I mean, you can put this down and take 10 minutes. It's not a problem. One thing I always tend to forget. The partition. So that circlip is on. That circlip is on. They're both in the right place. Move the piston down to bottom dead center. And gently put the head down. Put the 2 diagonal bolts in. Now we get the other bolts. Clean them. You know what, this one's a little buggered. I'm just going to throw that out. Find another one because I know we've got more. If they're not in one spot, they're in another. That's a head bolt. That'll do. Yeah, let's do some. I know. Holy parts bin, Batman. Big stuff is hard to inventory, but the little stuff you just need tons and tons and tons of. Okay. Tighten her down. One, two, three, four. Cylinder head's on. Yay! I think somebody had that in the wrong order. Something is definitely weird about the exhaust plate here. Why is this not moving? I have an idea. Don't fight it. Go with it. Okay. Muffler's on. Couple of 10 millimeters. Check with my hand. Good to go. Okay.